Ezra chapter number 1, brothers and sisters. Ezra chapter number 1. We've done Jeremiah, we've done Lamentations, and now here we are in the book of Ezra. This is our third message on the book of Ezra chapter number 1. And I'm sorry, I was reading that and I didn't turn there. Didn't turn there yet. Ezra chapter number 1. All right, would it be okay if we read the whole chapter tonight? It's only 11 verses. Although we've already gone through the first four pretty much in depth. Tonight will be just verses 5 through 9. But for the sake of context, let's all follow along and read through verses 1 through 11 together. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, The Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him, with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites with all them whose spirit God had raised to go up to build the house of the Lord which is in Jerusalem. And all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, and with precious things, beside all that was willingly offered. And Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridath the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them, 30 charges of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 9 and 20 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of a second sort, 410, and other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and of silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. Now we cannot recap for any length of time tonight, but just very briefly. As you know, Jeremiah had prophesied that because of the sin of the nation, Babylon was going to conquer them. And it was the chastisement of God. It was the calling back of the hearts of his people. Their hearts had grown cold and they had walked away from God. They were committing spiritual adultery. The idolatrous altars were erected all over the nation. And so God chastened them. God said, Babylon will come. They will take you captive. And there were some who followed the Lord in that they just surrendered, like Daniel, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And others who obeyed God, who said, God said to just submit to the Babylonians, and so we will. And so many were carried away captive when Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem and Judah. Many were killed. The blood ran in the streets of those that refused to surrender to Babylon. It was a sad day. The book of Lamentations is Jeremiah looking at a destroyed nation that he loves and seeing the lives of so many that were wasted because of their rebellion. And Jeremiah laments it until he can finally see the faithfulness of God and the restoration of the Lord. Now we come to Ezra and Nehemiah, and these books, Ezra and Nehemiah, are the record of the Jews returning back to the land, because God had promised through Jeremiah, we're told in verse number 1, that God is going to fulfill his word that he gave to Jeremiah, that after 70 years are accomplished, I'll bring you back. And so what we have in the book of Ezra is their faithfulness to record that God keeps his promises. And so Ezra writes here that God is keeping his promises, God is keeping his word, and so the group is returning. And as it was during the conquering, there were 3 departures from Judah and Jerusalem, and so it is in the return, there are 3 returns. And we are looking here at the first group that came back to Jerusalem for this purpose, to rebuild the house of God. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Having covered verses 1 through 4, let's start with verse number 5 so we can sort of see the type of people that returned So in verse number 5, the Bible says, "Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem." So we have a little bit of detail about those that returned. If you would do this with me, glance over at chapter 2. Just glance at it and scan it. Do you see what chapter number 2 is all about? I'm going to have to give somebody to read chapter 2 for me next week. Names and names and names and names in chapter number 2. Chapter number 2 is a detailed record of many of the families that returned and the record of those that returned. If you'll look at chapter number 2, verse number 62 of chapter 2. All right, so verse 62 of chapter 2. "These sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but they were not found, therefore were they as polluted, put from the priesthood." So you'll see that in this record that is being given, they are very careful to be deliberate and precise in the names and the families of those that are returning. Have you seen the signs that we're in a census right now? The 2020 census? How many of us are there, and where are they, and what all the details about the people and the records are sort of being gathered. We still do it today to keep records of population, of people groups, of where people live and how many live in this household and so forth and so on. And so it's not unusual that in the book of Ezra, as they're returning back to their land, they said, let's write down all the names of who's coming back. And chapter number 2 gives many names there, more of which it's not just the first group. Some came with Zerubbabel, but we'll sort of look at that next week. So what about these ones that returned? The first of the 3 waves of Jews that come back to the land after God fulfills his promise and works in the heart of Cyrus. Who are they? Well, the first thing you notice in verse 5 is they are the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and they are priests and Levites. And this is what I want to say. These were individuals of position. These were individuals of position. They were individuals of influence. They were men of experience and rank. These were leaders, priests and Levites and fathers of Judah and Benjamin. Let's just say this, and so it should be. So it should be the ones that first return are the leaders of the people. So it should be that the ones who step out in faith and say, we're going to do this, we're going to go, we will do our best, we will fulfill what God has called us to do. They should act this way. They were the leaders. I wrote down these 2 words, leaders lead. And that's what they did. These men of experience were the ones that should go. The men of position are the ones that should give the example. The men of influence, the people of influence, are the ones that should take the point and the front in this return. And I say to us tonight, many of us on this Wednesday night service, many of us have been saved and we know the Lord for a long, long time. Some of you have heard 5,000 sermons, right? You're like, yep, every one of them. I've heard we've heard a lot. I've been through Sunday school. I grew up through Sunday school. And what does the Bible say? To whom much has been given, much shall be required. Some of us tonight have grown up in Christian homes. Many of us tonight have served the Lord in a myriad of different ministries, different kinds of ministries, different ways. In music ministry, kids ministries, adult ministries, Sunday school classes. We've taught and deacons and pastors' wives and so forth, and the list goes on and on. Do you know who should be leading the way for adventures with God? Us. Us. Those who know the Lord well. Those who have walked with God for a long time. Those who maybe wouldn't have the same title, but we would be called the fathers of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Or the Levites or the priests, the individuals of experience and rank. I have sensed sometimes that as Christians get a little bit older, we tend to want to dismiss ourselves and say, the younger people should do that. And I get it, energy is a big deal, right? Energy is a huge deal. And energy begins to wane, right? We start to lose energy as we go. But never forget, energy can't replace experience, right? A young person who may have returned could not take the place of one of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin. There were certain ways of influence and certain types of position that were so necessary. We had a Bible study this morning, our Bible study in the book of Romans. We haven't been able to have it at the mall for a while, so we decided to have it right here. And I wouldn't embarrass him tonight, but I was talking with George Reynolds. You know, his wife passed away. And he was sort of broken up about thinking about his wife. And Sarah, he mentioned your mom would bring flowers to her every time she saw her. And Kathy's, that's Kathy's mom, who's home with the Lord. And Mr. Reynolds said this. He said, well, we were just talking about his marriage, and I won't tell you all that he said, but I said, George, I'll tell you this. People watched how, this Kathy's mom and dad, people watched how you related and cared for your wife. Right? Without ever saying a word. And sometimes it doesn't have to be said. But you know, those of us that are older and have more experience and have known the Lord longer, we should lead. We should lead the way in our families. We should lead the way in service to the Lord. We should lead the way in pioneering great things and ministries. And I know we start to lose a little bit of energy. And I'm sure some of these fathers of Judah and Benjamin, as they made their way back to Judah, were like, this is a long way. It was easier going out than it is coming back. And I'm a little tired. But the leaders led. I was encouraged by that. The ones that returned were also people of spiritual tuning. Spiritual tuning. Don't miss the phrase in verse 5 that this first group that came back, it says that with all of them whose spirit, God, this is verse 5, whose spirit God had raised to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. Do you know this first whole group that was going back to rebuild the house of God, if you could do an interview with them and have a microphone and say, tell us why you're going back, you know what they would say? Because I feel like God wants me to. So that verse tells us. I feel like God wants me to. He stirred my heart to go. He's inspired me inside to go. Now, we do got to be careful. Where we are today, God is not speaking his word anymore. His word is complete. But God is still stirring. And if you're a Christian, you felt the stirring of God, right? You felt the stirring of the Lord. You know what it's like for God to start making things inside feelings and uneasiness and curiosities and desires, how he begins to stir those up inside. I wrote down this scripture from the New Testament. It is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. And I, for one, want to be a Christian who says, Lord, you can work inside of me so that I could fulfill your will and your good pleasure. This group was tuned up spiritually. They were tuned up to the leading of God. The Spirit of God had been raised in them, and they were stirred. In the same stirring that Cyrus was stirred to tell people to go back. It was a filling of the mind and the heart with the will of God. And these individuals were tuned in spiritually. And I think that's a bit of application for us. Lord, keep me spiritually tuned up. You know, we are sort of in the radio time of you know, we don't use radios as much, but when we do use radios today, it's all digitally tuned. Anybody have one of those old cars where you got to turn the dial to tune, right? Where it's like you got this little thing here and it just sort of moves along the band. You remember those? And so you're starting to get close and it's starting to come in, right? The station's, you're turning the dial and it's starting to come in, then it gets really loud and you're really right on the signal, and then as you keep going, it starts to fade. I want to say that there's been parts of my life where I haven't been quite in that sweet spot in the middle. Maybe I'm on the right edge or the left edge of listening to the Lord, and there's some static in the way. But I think these first group of people that went back, they had been zoned in right there. And God had stirred them up to go, and they said, we're going. We're going. They were tuned in individuals. Would you consider this also? I believe they were men of courage and zeal. Because although not much of it is stated here in the text, can we just let our imagination and our thought process take us down a little journey? What do you think waited for them back home? I mean, here they are, they've been away for 70 years, right? They've been in Babylon, now the Persian Empire. And as they return home to a place that they last left, it was a mess. Everything had been torn apart. Everything had been destroyed. Everything had been leveled. Those that were left behind were those that, as far as the Babylonians were concerned, didn't have the skills or the talents to take away. I'm not trying to be harsh tonight, but Nebuchadnezzar left behind the unskilled people. And he took those that showed promise. And I believe that not only was the land desolate, but it probably had got occupied by other people. Just imagine. Here's a whole bunch of free land now. Nobody's here. Just go take out a little plot, figure out a place, build yourself a house. And these individuals who are returning, led by the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, the priests and the Levites, I think they knew that as they go back, this isn't going to be easy. It's going to be hardship. And to sort of add some more support to that point, in Babylon, I think things had gotten pretty good for them. If you sort of read the background of how things were in Babylon, and especially the way that people supported them, I think they had garnered a lot of favor in Babylon. I think they were somewhat welcomed now in Babylon. The whole tone of the empire had changed, and I think they had laid down some foundations and dug down some roots. And so for them to get up and to go back home was not as easy as we may see on the surface. These were men of courage and zeal. There were many who did not want to leave Babylon, I think because it was nice there. I'm just giving my opinion. This first group that went back was leaving a nice place to go to a not nice place. Was leaving an easy place to go to a hard place. They were individuals of courage and zeal. And to complete such a task of rebuilding the house of the Lord, God needed individuals who were not easily defeated. And I think this first group that went back are the kind that were not quitters. Like whatever they were going to face, they were going to push through. There was a zeal that could not be quenched by the gloomy and difficult circumstances. They were men of courage. They were individuals of great zeal, and their desire and their excitement to follow the will of God was contagious. And these were the type of people that returned. I wanted to say, fourthly, I believe these were individuals of great patriotism. Else, why would they leave Babylon for this desolate fatherland? Right? If you didn't love your homeland, you wouldn't go. But if you loved your homeland, these people went. They loved their homeland. Patriotism is not a bad word. It's not an evil word. These were men who loved their country, and loved their homeland, and loved their fatherland, and wanted to return it. And this patriotism was passed on through all of these returning groups, all the way down to Nehemiah, who conveyed that patriotism to those that returned with him to rebuild the walls around the city of Jerusalem. They were men of patriotism. They were men of selflessness. Notice here in at the end of verse number 5, what's their game plan for returning at the end of verse number 5? Do you see it there? What's their game plan? What's the project? Well, it's to build the house of the Lord, right? You know what's missing? Nothing is said about building their own houses. Nothing said about planting their own vineyards. Nothing said about making their own little niche in the land. These were selfless men, selfless individuals, selfless families, who said, we are going back for no personal ambitions. We are not going back for our own gain. We are not going back for our own selfish desires. We are going back for one reason, and that one reason is that we are going to rebuild the house of the Lord. We're not seeking wealth. We're not trying to get an advancement on power. We're not looking for power. We're looking for just the opportunity to rebuild the house of the Lord. And I just want to say, isn't that wonderful? That's what they went back for. I mean, just trying to take a close look at these individuals encourages my heart. They were also individuals who could be trusted. they could be trusted. You say, why do you say that they could be trusted? Because people gave them a lot of money. Right? Here, take these gold bowls. Here, take all of this cash. Here, take these coins. Here, take our animals. Here, take all of this. And if you didn't trust them, you wouldn't give it. But there must have been something about this first group that went back, that there was so much trust. There was so much confidence in who these individuals were that were making this first journey back, that they were willing, the others were willing to give to them of their goods and of their own wealth, so that they could be part in the rebuilding of the house of the Lord. There's so much I like about this first group that went back, and we haven't even read their names in chapter number 2. But there's so much good about this first group that went back. Number 2, not only look at the individuals that returned, but let's take a closer look at the support that they received. Now in verse number 6, the Bible says, and all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver and gold, with goods and with beasts and with precious things, beside all that was willingly offered. You know what they could have said? You know what their neighbors could have said? Well, you got God on your side. Go for it. Good luck. Would you help us? Nope. God will supply all your need. How did God supply their need? By their neighbors, right? By their friends, by their family, by the Persians, right? So the Jews that remained, and even the others who were not part of the nation, they stayed behind, but even though they stayed behind, they were making up for their absence. And I think this is borne out in this first phrase in verse number 6, that they strengthened their hands with silver. It is as if they said, we can't go, we won't go, so we're going to give to you so that you could go. Does that sound familiar at all? Does that sound anything like missions? I can't go, but I'll give so you could go. I can't do it, but if you're willing to do it, I'll help. And everything in ministry is sort of like that. Not everybody can tear a wall down out there, right? Some here tonight can. And it's always great to say, I may not be able to tear down the wall, but I can give some money to buy the drywall to rebuild it. Right? I mean, that's the kind of spirit you have here. The spirit you have here is there's no animosity between those that remain and those that go. There's unity between those that remain and those that go, in that the ones that stay behind want to give all of the help they can to make up for their absence. And how did they give? Verse 4 and 6 tell us how they gave. So in verse number 4, the key phrase there is it was free will offering. Do you see that in verse number 4? Sort of the end of verse number 4, it was a free will offering. And look at the end of verse number 6, the very last 2 words. It was willingly offered. So Cyrus didn't say, here's a tax. We're going to tax everybody. The Jews are going to have to pay an extra tax because it's actually they're going back to build their place. So the Jews, they have this extra tax. Persians, we'll give a little tax, and everybody's going to be required to give, and we'll send out other people to make sure they collect. Everybody's got to collect. It wasn't that at all. It was free will and willingly offered. And you may have a different take on this than I do, but I think they went back with plenty of provision to get the job done. That's the kind of spirit that there was among the people. They received the support, free will. I think the Babylonians gave, I know the Jews gave so that they could make up for their absence, and I think the Babylonians or the Persians gave out of respect for the friendship, and the Jews had earned the high esteem of their neighbors. Let's hold our place here, if you wouldn't mind, and go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, just to sort of look at the way giving hasn't changed in the work of the Lord over all these years. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Giving is still the same. Second Corinthians chapter 9 and verse number 6. The Bible says in verse 6 of chapter 9, "But this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye always, having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. As it is written, he hath dispersed abroad, he hath given to the poor, his righteousness remaineth forever. Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness. You see, giving hasn't changed in all these years. Never once has it happened in this church, and it will never happen, where we will force somebody to give. We operate on free will offerings, right? It makes it a challenge sometimes when you try to do anything with a bank, because it's hard for them to understand that there's no prices, right? How's your sales? Well, sort of bad. We're not selling anything. And they have to analyze things from a different perspective, from free will giving. But all those that were around these returning Jews, it seems widespread in verse number 4 of our text, because it says, all they that were round about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver and gold and goods and beasts. There was widespread support. I think in our Baptist ranks, just so I can be frank tonight, I think in our Baptist ranks we're getting better at starting churches. I think there was a while when we were very poor at starting churches. We would sort of say to somebody, good luck, God bless. See you later. And I think today I was just talking with one individual who knows someone who planted a church out by Youngstown area and got a lot of support, and churches were behind them, and they were given some monthly things, and they were doing all the things for the building and so forth. And the individual said that the church is going great. It's good. It's good when we say, I can't do it, but I'll help you get it done however I can. One last thing as we close tonight, I want to take a glimpse in chapter 1 about the vessels of the house of the Lord, because this is really exciting. I know it's a list of like bowls and knives and stuff, but Cyrus the king, verse 7, Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridath the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Isn't it wonderful that these items that were taken are remarkably preserved by God? Consider that. What would you normally think would happen to conquest booty? It would be spent, broken, disregarded, wasted, abused. But God made sure that it did not happen with these things. They were remarkably preserved. And I just wanted to say tonight, thank God that he remarkably preserved his word. For all those that say it's impossible for God to preserve his word, I would say, well, how is it impossible that God preserved all these vessels of the house of the Lord? That the ones that got taken out are the ones that went back. Just that simple. There was a record taken of all the things that Nebuchadnezzar brought out. There was a record taken. It was inventory. I was speaking with someone just the other day, and they said, I'm working from home. I said, what are you doing? They said, I'm doing inventory. And I raised an eyebrow, like, how can you do inventory at home? How do you know what's there? Like, don't you have to check the shelves to do the inventory? But anyways, that's just another story. They did the inventory of everything that we took out of the house, that was taken out of the house of the Lord, was recorded and written down and inventoried. And Nebuchadnezzar did not use them for his own purpose. He put them in the house of his gods. And they would say, well, that's just terrible. Why would he put the things from the house of the Lord in the house of his gods? I'm not questioning that. I think it's just amazing that God preserved them. It's sort of like this. Here's everything we've taken. Now let's put it in a nice, safe museum where nobody will mess with it. And it'll be preserved. It's amazing how God preserved these vessels for the house of the Lord. There's one instance when part of the things were desecrated. And those of you that know the book of Daniel can remember. Remember Belshazzar had that party? In Daniel chapter number 5, I believe it is. The Bible says that Belshazzar had that party, and he took a few of the vessels that were taken from the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. And he took those vessels to his party, and he was drinking with his friends. You can read it in Daniel 5. Belshazzar took those items that had been put aside by Nebuchadnezzar, special, and now he's desecrating them And that's when the hand wrote on the wall. You remember. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. And he sought for the interpretation. It was, you have been found in the balance, you have weighed in the balances and found wanting. And that night Belshazzar died. And you say, was it because he desecrated the vessels of the Lord? You be the judge. But God preserved these things and kept them. You say, well, why is that so important? Let's go to Jeremiah 27, and we'll look at this scripture here and close very briefly, I promise. The kids club gets out at 8:15. I'm very aware. Jeremiah 27. Here's why it's so important that a record was kept and that they were preserved. Because look at verse number 22 of 27 Jeremiah. Jeremiah 27:22. Actually, maybe we'll read 21 and 22. This will excite you. It did me. Here's Jeremiah giving all his prophecies. This is before any carrying away, right? Here's his prophecy. Yea, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that remain in the house of the Lord and in the house of the king of Judah and of Jerusalem. They shall be carried to Babylon, and there shall they be until the day that I visit them, saith the Lord. And then will I bring them up, now look at this, and restore them to this place. And I just have to imagine that these individuals, as they're carrying these, and it's a lot of, I mean, this is a lot of cupboards of stuff, okay? As they're carrying all of these things back, their mind is probably going back to Jeremiah said and Jeremiah wrote that God promised that all these things that were taken by our conqueror would make their way back to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. And I think they walked back saying, isn't this amazing that God keeps his word? We shouldn't be amazed that God keeps his word, but when we see it fleshed out for us, shown so vividly here, it should thrill our heart, and I believe it does. There was responsibility here, just to draw this to a close, and we'll continue with chapter 2 next week. So Cyrus takes these vessels, and he hands them to the treasurer, Mithridath. All right, and all this is said for responsibility. All right, here's the record of what we took. And Mithridath, we're going through these, we're making sure that everything is here, and all the numbers of everything are here, and so we're giving them to Mithridath, the treasurer, and then the treasurer, Mithridath, numbers them all again and gives them to Sheshbazzar. It's like they're filling out receipts, bill of ladings, right? All right, let's make sure everything is written, what we have, what has been given, what we have to carry, and can you imagine the weight of responsibility on Sheshbazzar? He's the prince of Judah, right? Numbered under them, Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah, verse 8, end of verse 8. And Sheshbazzar has this responsibility of putting all of these vessels in their place and in containers, or however it was, and sorting them by groups and by number and by register, and putting all of these things together. And on the horses, on the chariots, on the wagons, on the carts, or however they carried them, Sheshbazzar had the responsibility. He would be held accountable to get all of these things from Babylon back to the house of the Lord in good order. What a great, trustworthy man, right? What a trustworthy man. We don't. To this date, I could not tell you who Sheshbazzar ever was until I reread Ezra chapter number 1. But what a trustworthy man who loved the Lord, loved the house of God, and took such care and responsibility for these things. The vessels of gold and the vessels of silver were 5,400. Would you think about that? How are you going to carry 5,400 gold and silver vessels? You know, when we did our big meal here, didn't we have like 50 bowls or something? Wasn't it something like that? 100 bowls. And we thought, where are you going to put 100 bowls? Where are you going to put 100 serve? Remember? Where are you going to put all these bowls? We've stuffed them in somewhere. They're somewhere around here. 5,400, and we'll end with the end of verse number 11. All these, middle of verse number 11, we'll close here. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. It was sort of like this. Mission accomplished. I got them all back, just like the Lord wanted it to be done. I don't know, as I read through Ezra chapter number 1, you can't help but read that chapter and say, Lord, you are so amazing. We praise you for your faithfulness and for your oversight in all of these little things. All of these bowls. If God watches out for a bowl, he's going to watch out for our things. Things don't escape his view, right? Belshazzar takes a cup and desecrates it. God sees that, right? God kept the record, all of these things. And I praise him tonight for his care over us and that he keeps his promise, right, brothers and sisters? He keeps his promises. Praise his name. Let's all bow together for a prayer tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this study of Ezra. Thank the Lord for his promises, his faithfulness. Tonight, I just want to ask us this as we can't make application for everything tonight. But let's, brothers and sisters, let's make sure that we're tuned up in that place where God can still stir in our hearts. I don't want to make this too grand or set the bar too high. But are we, even those of us that are older tonight, are we at a place where if God called us to do something big, like go back home and rebuild that house? Are we at a place in our spiritual life where we're tuned in enough that we'd say, yes, Lord, I'll go? Or have we turned the dial a little too far to the right, a little too far to the left, and we're getting all that static? We're not really receptive to that stirring up of the heart. I just say tonight with all seriousness that I can say, I want to stay in a place where God can stir me anytime he wants to. Anytime he chooses to stir up something in me, I want to be ready and willing. Sort of like these fathers of the tribes were. I'll go. I'll go. I'll do it. I'll work it. I'll start it. I'll finish it. I'll help in it. I'll give toward it. If you stir in my heart, I'll do it. You know, in the end, that's all God expects, right? Willingness, just to be a vessel. Let's all stand with our heads bowed quietly and our eyes closed for a moment. We just have a few minutes here to pray.